So today's session is entitled From Compliance to Community, Event Accessibility Beyond the ADA During Program Development. Before we dive into our session, we wanted to remind everyone about the Zoom Q&A feature that we'll be utilizing today. If you have questions that you'd like our presenters to answer, please post those in the Q&A box throughout the session. We'll try to answer as many of those questions as possible. We have two co-facilitators assisting with us today for our Q&A and our chat, Emily Smith and Cheryl Newberry. Hosting a successful event means that making it accessible to everyone, but knowing where to start can be challenging. So how do you create welcoming spaces for people with all types of disabilities? In this talk, we will go beyond the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, to discuss the many ways in which you can make an event accessible and welcoming. So now I'm pleased to introduce our speakers. So we have Renee Pusey. She serves as the Talent and Professional Development Coordinator for Penn State Extension. She holds a master's degree in Organization Development and Change from Penn State University. Her guiding belief is that learning is a lifelong endeavor with endless growth opportunities. The second speaker we have is Claire Well-Beloved Stone. She is the Vice President and co-founder of Blue Trunk Foundation. She also works as the telemedicine program specialist at the University of Virginia. Her work focuses on the patient experience and improving access to telehealth in health disparity populations. She received her BA in anthropology from Connecticut College and her MPH from the Dartmouth Institute for Health Policy and Clinical Practice. In October 2017, she embarked on a 9-month solo backpacking trip that took her to all 7 continents, and she has lived and worked in 5 countries. So I will go ahead and hand it off to them.
Thank you, Bethany.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. So my name is Claire. I will be one of our presenters today. I am a white woman. I have brunette hair pulled back in a ponytail, and I'm wearing a black blouse. And I will hand it over to Renee before we jump in.
All right. Thank you, Claire. I'm Renee Pusey from Penn State Extension, as Bethany mentioned. And I am also a white woman wearing a navy blue Penn State Extension branded shirt today. So at Penn State Extension, we believe that all people should have access to science-based education. And so I included this slide today because we're going to talk about access in a different way. And I really appreciate everybody for answering our question in the chat of a place that you have found to be welcoming and accessible. I asked this question of a committee that was working with me to plan an in-person conference in the fall of 2023. And as all of you, we had a real variety of answers. And for some people, the answer came right away to them because they had used a wheelchair or possibly a stroller that made them think about accessibility. Others of you answered about how welcoming and kind people were and gestures of welcoming you. And today, I'm hoping that our presentation can give you an opportunity to expand what that might mean when we say welcoming and accessible. Because as my committee learned, there was much more to consider when we're planning an event or a program on how we can make it more welcoming and accessible. So I will explain the work that Blue Trunk did with Penn State Extension in the fall of 2023 and the second part of the presentation. But for now, I'd like to pass it off to Claire so she can help you learn from Blue Trunk and their mission.
Thank you, Renee. So I won't spend too long going over our who we are as a nonprofit, but I did want to put our mission up here. I'm one of the co-founders, as Bethany mentioned, of Blue Trunk Foundation. And we started because we had found through my co-founder, she is disabled and she travels a lot and traveled both before and after developing disabilities, and realized how challenging it was to find that information, to be able to travel with ease. And so that was really what the organization was born out of. And we believe that everybody should have that opportunity to travel. And whether that means going to another country or just there's a new coffee shop you want to try out, or you're on a business trip, a lot of people experience the world around them in many different ways, and we want to make that easier. And then in context of why is that important? How many people is this impacting? So 1 in 4 Americans identify as disabled, and this is self-reported. And this also doesn't cover things like short-term disability. So if you were to have a surgery or you broke a bone and were recovering, you would be technically classified as disabled, but you might not self-identify that way. And this also doesn't account for older adults who may have similar needs for accessibility, but also don't self-identify as disabled. So this is probably a lower number. And this number is also higher when you get into rural areas, higher in minority groups. So there's a lot of impact around disability in the world. And then from the business side, kind of how does that tie into travel? People with disabilities spend a lot of money on travel. So you can see here, and this was several years old. So now that the travel industry is bouncing back from COVID, I wouldn't be surprised if this number has gone up. But $17 billion a year on travel through individuals with disabilities. And taking into consideration that people with disabilities oftentimes are traveling with friends, family, caregivers. So even though they're spending that money, there's also more money that is being spent in the travel industry. Okay, so now getting into the event piece, where we really want to focus today. So what makes an event accessible? So we talked a little bit, as you guys wrote in the chat there, of what makes a place you've been accessible. And when we think about events, there's a lot more moving parts, and whether that's a conference or some other type of event. But for this purpose, we did focus on conferences. So when you think of accessibility, a lot of people tend to think of wheelchairs. So as you can see here, a sign for a wheelchair path. Maybe it's a separate entrance, maybe it's a ramp, or allergens. And this was a great experience we had with allergen considerations when we went and got ice cream when we were visiting Penn State. And so those are the big things, but there's a lot more that actually comes up with accessibility and disability. The ADA is another one that people think of a lot. So you've, I'm sure, all heard of it. And the spirit of the ADA is really captured in this quote here. So the idea that no individual should be discriminated against based on disability. But when you go into the checklist, this is just a screenshot of part of it. It's a very long document. The checklist is focused largely on mobility. And that is a big part of disability. It's a big part of accessibility and very important, but it definitely doesn't cover everything. And so the approach we take is to try to think a little bit more outside the box and how to make things feel fully inclusive. So as you can see here, there's a wide range of accommodations. And we like to say that accessibility is different for every single person. So saying something's wheelchair accessible even doesn't mean the same for each person. Someone might be able to transfer, someone else might not. When you look at even hearing loss, you might have people who want sign language or people who want captions. So there is a wide range of accommodations. And then also each person who has a disability may have different needs, may have overlapping conditions. So we try to emphasize not just saying something's accessible, but to saying how it's accessible and thinking through what those accommodations can look like. And generally, this came up in a lot of your answers. So that welcoming environment is a really, really important first step. So this sign here was from a restaurant, and even just showing here is an option, like the options of the accommodations we provide, because it can sometimes be intimidating to ask for accommodations. You're not sure if you'll be met with kindness. You're not sure if it's possible. So creating that welcoming environment right off the bat. And one of the ways to do that is thinking through those different types of disabilities, different types of accommodations that you can make. And we like to think through kind of physical and sensory aspects of your event. So not focusing just on physical, but thinking about things like lighting, like sound, all of those other aspects. If you were to walk into a room, what are you feeling? What are you experiencing? And so now I just wanted to kind of run through a couple examples. It's not exhaustive, but just to get you thinking, like we said, thinking outside the box, thinking of different types of accommodations beyond the ADA, beyond looking at allergens and wheelchairs. What else is there? And we will touch on those too, because they are also very important. So looking at vision, this was also on our trip when we went to visit, when we went to Renee and went to that conference. And we were very happy to find this cafe that had this large print menu. You can see the pen in there for scale. And so having large text versions is one way to make those materials more accessible. Another thing is if you have these materials on something like an app or a website for your event, not having them just a picture. So like this would not be a great example if you were putting it up for an event, but to actually have the PDF or a Word document so that it's screen reader friendly. Another thing is, as Renee and I did at the beginning there, giving presentations of yourself. So someone in the audience might not be able to see you, having a presentation is helpful. And one thing which I think I'm still learning, getting used to, and I don't know that I did, is when you switch to say, this is Claire speaking, so that people can keep track of who it is. And you can see a lot of it is a learning process. It takes a while and you might not do it every time, but we just encourage to constantly keep trying to improve there. And then the last one I do want to point out on this, which also takes us into the next slide, is reserving seating closer to the presenters or the screen if you are in a room that has a presentation. Although sometimes you might see seats reserved by the doors, so it's a shorter distance to travel. That is helpful if someone isn't able to travel very far, wants to be able to step out for any reason to be close to the door. But some people might want to be closer to the screen so that they can see what's on the screen better. Or if we have hearing disabilities, so that they can lip read more easily, which is on the next one. So for hearing, jumping into another sense here, captions whenever possible. The technology has gotten so much better on this. Things like Zoom, Google Slides, PowerPoint, you can turn on captions in presentation mode. Live captioning is the gold standard, but we understand that's not always possible. And those auto captions are becoming better and better. You just might want to be aware that if you have very specific jargon, it might not catch in the captions, or if you have presenters with very thick accents, again, that might not catch in auto captions. And so those might be situations where you'd want to prioritize getting a live captioner for the event. On the other side, you might have sign language. So not everyone with hearing loss uses sign language, not everyone prefers captions. And there are things that you get in sign language that you lose when it's just captioning. And when you have an event that has social aspects, whether that's a happy hour or networking, it's good to have sign language interpreters available for those too, so that the person is really welcome to the whole event and not just the presentations. Because I think, as we all know, going to conferences, a lot of it happens in those in-between moments when you're networking, when you're at lunch. And so we don't want people to feel like they're isolated and taken out of that whole part of the event. And we have a couple other things here. I'll just skip down to the repeating questions. So I'm sure we've all been in presentations where you hear a question and you can't really hear it. Someone stood up, there's no microphone, and the person starts answering and you don't even know what they're answering. So repeating the question, especially when there's no microphone, is helpful, or providing those microphones, roving or microphone stands during that Q&A session. Okay, and so now again, thinking outside the box here, neurodivergence, there's a lot of ways you can provide accommodations. Quiet space with dim lighting, so having somewhere if you need kind of sensory de-escalation. My co-founder Rupa, she was recovering from having a pretty serious concussion. And so she still would like to have quiet spaces for a while after that, because the light could trigger migraines or could also just kind of be exhausting and cause other things. And so having that quiet space to go sit, dim lighting, relax, because I mean, conferences are overwhelming to everyone. And so you can imagine with any sort of triggers like that, it would be even more overwhelming. And those spaces can be used for other reasons. People might want to nurse or pump. It's great to have multiple spaces, spaces designated for that. But again, we understand that you might not always have 4 extra rooms to designate. But just to make it clear that that is a quiet space. It's not supposed to be a space to go have a private meeting. It's supposed to be a quiet space. Fidget spinners or tactile items are great. And those can be anything from like your traditional fidget spinner to stress balls to silly putty, having some available, whether that's on request or just made available to everyone. And then plain language. And there are government resources on this. I am not going to pretend to be an expert in plain language, but there are resources on how to write things in the best way to make them accessible across a wide range of comprehension levels. And we recommend reviewing those and having that available. Okay, musculoskeletal. So this is what a lot of people think about, right? And looking at those accessible entryways. And that is very, very essential. They aren't always clear where they are. And so if you're in a space that doesn't have clear signage, add signage about where that accessible entrance is, put something up that's temporary, have it clear if maybe a side door is locked if it's normally not an entry and it needs to be unlocked, or someone needs to be there to open it, or there needs to be a phone number. So keeping that in mind, that sometimes, yes, there's an accessible entrance, but there might need to be a couple more steps to make sure that people can actually use it. And then, as you can see, we like this picture because it shows the different push buttons for the entrance. I know you probably aren't renovating buildings, but trying to look for those types of things. And if they don't have the push buttons, considering how heavy is the door, can we prop it open? Or again, can someone be there to help? And then accessible seating. As I mentioned before, some people might transfer out of wheelchairs, some people might not. So having either a place where you can remove a chair and someone can put their wheelchair there and sit there remain in their chair. Or if they are transferring to a chair, you need to make sure you have space to store mobility aids. So whether someone has a walker or wheelchair, to be able to put that somewhere that's out of the way. If you have a large space and it can be near them and out of the way, that's great. But if it needs to get stored somewhere else, then making sure it's clear and that they know how to get it back and who to request for that. And along this, one thing that's not on here is having those pathways as well. We talk a little bit about pathways, but making sure to have wide enough paths, right? When we're in conferences, we're trying to fit as many people as we can in the room within the fire marshal, but we want to be able to navigate tables, and that's everyone, right? You don't want to be squeezing awkwardly between seats. So having those pathways, asking people to store bags underneath tables so that they're not in the way. And so just small things like that can really make a big difference. Okay, and we're almost gonna hand it off here. So one of our last points is allergies and asthma. And nut-free is one you probably hear a lot, but nuts are one of the biggest airborne, not the biggest airborne trigger for allergies. So making spaces nut-free, and not just not serving nuts yourself, but also announcing that it is a nut-free space and requesting that people refrain from eating nuts in the venue. And that's for people's safety. Other things like strong fragrances. So if you have like the bathroom cleaning or candles, to consider how strongly fragranced those are and to avoid them whenever possible. Again, we know you don't have control of all of that, but if there are things that you can control, trying to reduce that, use non-fragranced or lightly fragranced, maybe like essential oil items or things, so that we're not triggering those responses. And then for last one, for allergies can be complicated. People can be allergic to a lot of different things. And one of the easiest ways, instead of, again, we don't want to just say allergen free. That doesn't mean much. You might be allergic to something that someone else isn't allergic to. So having a list of ingredients really is the best way. That can be a list made available on request. You can mark the most common allergens and then just have that list ready from the kitchen so that if someone needs to review it, they don't have to ask you about 20 different things that they're allergic to. They can look over the list and say, okay, this is safe for me to eat, this isn't. We've also gotten special meals before. So if it's going to be a set meal and you need something that's made separately, you can request that. Rupa's also had people just DoorDash for her before because she knows certain things are safe. And so they say, we'll just reimburse you, get DoorDash. We don't want you to have an allergic reaction. So there's a lot of ways to deal with that, but ingredients are a very, very big part of it. And then just to close out, so those were, I know, very quick, a lot of different things, but just some ideas of what makes something accessible and some closing ideas of other considerations. So if people request accommodations in pre-registration, it's really nice to follow up with them and make sure that the accommodation you're providing is meeting their need. So you can call them, email them, and say, hi, we got your registration. These are the things we're going to do, X, Y, and Z. Does that work? Will that meet your needs? And also people might have skipped that, rushed through registration. They might not have seen it. Maybe they came last minute. So you also want to make it clear in real time at the event how to request accommodations. So do they go see the event coordinator? Do they speak to any of the staff at the venue? Who are they talking to? And with that in mind, if someone goes up to someone who's working at the event, do they know who to go to? So have a clear point person of, okay, yes, thanks so much for telling me that. I'm going to go talk to Renee and make sure it's coordinated for you. And then the last point we want to make here is using consultants in the disability space. So it's important to have people who have that disability lens to help with the planning, and that we're not just guessing at things, right? So get people who have experience when you're looking into events. So that was our very quick overview. I'm happy to answer any questions by email. I think they're going to throw the email and website in the chat as well. But my email is just my name, Claire, CLAIRE @bluetrunk, TRUNK.org. And I'm happy to answer any questions. We also have done other webinars, whatever it is. So please feel free to reach out to me. We're always happy to hear from you. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Renee to talk about our experience working together.
All right, this is Renee speaking. I'm going to use Claire's cue, and thank you, Claire. So as I mentioned, we had an in-person event in fall of 2023 of 400 people, mostly extension educators or agents were attending. And I had been introduced to Rupa Valdez, who is the co-founder of Blue Trunk with Claire. And we brought them in to help us, well, initially to be presenters at the conference, but then we decided to use their consulting services. And so we were going to use them both for consulting and education to help us with this event. It was called an Educator Institute. And our goal was to provide education on how to make extension programs more welcoming and accessible beyond ADA, and something that we could all learn from. So first, talking about the consulting. As I mentioned, we did our first committee meeting with Blue Trunk. We came in and we asked that question, where have you been that has been accessible or welcoming? And some people were very honest and said, I've never thought about that. I've never needed to worry about accessibility. I've never had a family member in a wheelchair. And that is like kind of the first thing people think about is accessibility via a wheelchair. But through working with Blue Trunk and working with the committee, they started asking us questions, and they reviewed our event plans, and they actually went on a virtual tour of the venue where we took the laptop with us and walked around from room to room that we would be using, and they would ask us questions and we would answer the question by showing them the door or the buffet line, whatever it might be. And through that, they gave us some great prompts to ask the venue. So I was able to go into meetings with our conference coordinator at the venue and ask about, do you have the ingredients of all the items that will be provided on the buffet? Where can we get that? Can we have a quiet room incorporated into the venue? So the prompts that they gave us were really helpful. And then in addition, we use the resources that you'll see on the website when you go to bluetrunk.org. So they have accessibility guides that are really helpful. Encourage you to go there and look at these and share these with people that you know are planning programs. There's a physical space accommodations, a conference accommodations, and meal accommodations, and some just wonderful suggestions. And it's kind of like a buffet all in itself, but you can pick and choose. You might not go through and want to incorporate every idea, but some are going to be more impactful for your group and your event that you might want to incorporate. As far as the educational piece, Blue Trunk did do a presentation at our conference, very similar to what Claire shared with you today, helping us expand our thoughts on what accessibility means. They did a follow-up breakout session that allowed people to go into a room and have further discussion and kind of talk about, well, what if this and what if that, which the group that selected that breakout session really enjoyed. And then they offered the website as well, which is free resources to anyone. You do need to put in your email address so they can just track who is accessing their website, but it is free. And then they set us up for a participant activity where we gave every participant a form to fill out, asking them what are the 7 observations of the conference that they felt created accessibility, and then give us one suggestion that could make it even more accessible. We had 96 people participate in this. It was optional. And we received hundreds of observations of what made it accessible. It was just great to see the variety of things people noticed, the things people noticed that Claire had mentioned in their presentation. And then the kind of icing on the cake was they gave us 35 suggestions of things we could have done to make it even more accessible. And that was really exciting to see them looking at it through the eyes of how can we improve this. Now, some of the things that we did as a result of the Blue Trunk consultation for the event was we did have a fidget toy, a stress ball that was just fun, little cow that we put at every seat. And we did provide a quiet room that we announced and let people know was available to them. We made some copies of our printed material, not a lot, but a handful of them. And we announced that they were available at the registration desk if someone was interested in them. We did remove nuts from the snack area because we became aware of a peanut allergy. And I will say that working with the venue, you know, some things they were willing to do for us, and there were other things that they said, we can't do that. And that was fine, but it didn't hurt to ask. The other thing that became real apparent was making sure we communicated the things that were available to our conference attendees so that they knew the ways we were making it more accessible. I will say Claire's mention of the seating in a room. There's no question that a venue wants to fit as many people as possible. And in the case of this particular event, we did hit the limit, actually probably exceeded it a little bit. We had chairs in the back of the room, and therefore our tables were too close together. A great lesson for me going forward to making sure I ask the question, how far apart will the tables be when you fit this many people in the room? Because not only for accessibility, but for safety, it's important that people can walk in a clear path. So those were some of the things that we did do for this event. Just to share a little evaluation, overall satisfaction with the presentation that Blue Trunk gave us was very high. We typically do not get evaluation ratings of extremely satisfied or extremely likely from our audience. I know this from doing this job for 6 years. So these were very, very high results for our typical conference evaluation. So we were very pleased with that. At this time, I do see that we do have questions, so we can take some questions. Cheryl?
I'll
Absolutely.
Oh
Go
yeah,
ahead.
I'm going to take over, take the baton from Cheryl, and just thank you both so much. We have a question, and I think it really speaks to that this notion of like prioritization, and how to prioritize different things. And so a participant is wondering, would individuals that kind of need, or they have an awareness that they need fidget spinners already, likely not bring them if they need them? And how do you kind of navigate that in terms of like anticipatory priorities?
Yeah. So I think, I mean, it's definitely possible that someone would bring that with them. But part of it is also oftentimes people, like working in the disability space, people feel that the burden is on them to make themselves be able to fit in. And so having these things, like we mentioned, with that accessible, like that welcoming atmosphere, can be a small thing that can make it more accessible. And we're not saying it has to be at every person's seat. They had the stress balls at Penn State, which was great. I still have it on my desk and use it. But it's not necessary to have them, like hundreds of them. You can just have 4 or 3 that are available at registration if someone needs them. And again, as Renee mentioned, right, you might not be able to do everything. And so trying to think what your audience, who are your attendees, what they'll need the most, what you've seen. Maybe you've seen a couple things come in on requests that you see are going to be a trend, or maybe from past events, you've had certain accommodations requested. So it is a balance of providing what you can and trying to prioritize. I know that's kind of a yes and kind of a no. If you can provide them, it's great. If you can only have 1 or 2, that's still good. If that's not really meeting your audience, then you need to put the resources into, say, captioning, because that's a more important part of your event, then by all means put the money into the captioning.
Awesome. And a follow-up question, and this might be relevant for both of you also, in that notion of gathering information ahead of time, what are your thoughts about statements in the registration process that kind of quote, please let us know if you need accommodations at least X days, weeks in advance, as they do take time to arrange as part of that process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is Claire again speaking. And definitely, we understand you can't just get a venue to do something overnight. So having it as part of the initial registration is really great. And then it's fine to say we would like to have accommodation requests by X date and time. If someone reaches out after, that doesn't mean you shouldn't try, but you can just let them know we're going to contact the venue, but we'll have to get back to you and see if it's something that's possible. So yes, definitely. I think as with any sort of RSVP, right, you'd like them to respond at a certain time so you know what to expect.
Awesome. This is Emily speaking. I'm moderating the Q&A to apply my learnings from today. We have a question about sort of exactly what you did in the beginning, modeling the introduction, describing yourself. Are there resources, and this might be a Blue Trunk resource, that should be included when a speaker is describing themselves? Much of the detail this person is asking, they hear self-descriptions, but that would have no meaning with, extreme sight limitations or blind. A lot of folks, many people in the community maybe, don't care for those descriptions. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, this is Claire again. Another great question. That we're always looking for new resource guides. That would be a good one. We don't have one yet. The general guidance is to keep it short, like just a sentence or two. You don't want to, I saw something and it was saying it's a sketch, it's not an oil painting. And it is a mix. I think this is common practice in disability advocacy space to introduce yourself. But it is a mix on who finds it helpful and some people don't. Like you mentioned here, if for people who are fully blind or more extreme loss of sight, this might not be helpful. But for some people, again, accessibility is different for everyone. So for some people with moderate vision loss, this might be helpful. And I have seen as well, at least for in-person events, by describing themselves, it helps for someone to ask a guide later, like, hi, I really wanted to talk to the person who was presenting. She said she had a black top on. Her name was Claire. Can you help me find her? So by having that description, it can maybe help other people, right? After a talk, I would just know who to go up and talk to, but they might need to have someone help guide them. So it can be helpful. It's definitely, I think, as many things, right? Some people like to say a person with a disability. Some people like to say disabled person. There's always divides on what people like and don't like.
Awesome, thank you. And Renee, this question might be for you. And there's someone wondering about just like the logistics. So at Extension, it's great to potentially partner with consultants, but that process might not always be as easy with different policies and procedures. How did you navigate that? Would you mind sharing? I don't know if that's applicable to everyone, but a few folks are wondering how you partnered with Blue Trunk in that. I know you mentioned it, but sort of the more logistics.
Sure. This is Renee, and I will agree that at our university, using the word consultant draws up a red flag for people, and it makes the process much harder. So in this case, we were able to invite Claire and Rupa to be presenters and put our request through as speakers. And then in addition to their speaking engagement, they provided us their consultation services. But I would really encourage you to speak to Rupa and Claire directly to see how that might work for you at your university with what your rules are. They were very flexible with us. So I'll just kind of leave it at that. But I do understand that that word, consultant, can, create some issues. So thanks for the question, Ellen. Or was it Ellen? Sorry, that's the next question.
Oh, well, that's the next question. This is Emily again. Claire, did you want to add anything to that last question? I apologize. I just wanted to.
No, this is Claire. Not particularly. I would say both Rupa and I work at the University of Virginia as well. We kind of split lives with all the things we do. So we understand that there is a lot of bureaucracy and red tape, especially dealing with public institutions. If your institution is open to different ways to do it, we're happy to. And that can kind of be a case-by-case basis what that looks like.
Awesome, thank you. We have a question that's a little bit more in the weeds of an event and accommodating both the audience and the potential speaker. So if you have a stage where you want to essentially, a stage platform so people can see the presenter more easily, but then that stage maybe isn't accessible to presenters who maybe have disabilities or need accommodations, and maybe navigating sort of the competing priorities or priorities that might not completely align, I guess.
So I'm going to start answering that and then I'll let Claire finish. So thank you, Ellen, for that question, because that's one thing that we did do at this event that I would never have thought of. But Claire and Rupa had suggested that we get a ramp to our stage. And I didn't know that that was an option, but it was. Our venue was more than willing to accommodate that. And they put up a ramp, and I had another speaker actually thank me and say, thank you for having this ramp because the stairs are hard for me. And I was like, oh, okay. But so it definitely doesn't hurt to ask to accommodate, to have that ramp as a standard versus a need for a particular individual. Claire, do you want to talk about that from the space of the audience if you don't have a ramp?
Yeah. So this is Claire again. It definitely the gold star, the best practice is to have that ramp. If you're in a space that doesn't have it, so the speaker is not available to be on the stage, and that changes visibility. That comes back to what I was talking about before with having seating available up front. So having some seats that are marked off as accessible. If it's just one, someone might have already sat there. If it's just one presentation that is going to be like that, maybe making sure to find those people who had requested accommodations to let them know if they want to be closer for that specific presentation. But if you're at a larger event, it depends on your resources. So seating closer, if you have more like AV resources and you're able to have a video camera and it's on the screen, then that's another option. I've definitely been to events where they have the speaker on the screen along with the slides. So you could have a video of the person up there. So there's a couple ways to work around it if you can't have a ramp up onto the stage. And another thing to consider is right seating on stage. So a presenter might want to have a stool or a chair to be able to sit down as well while they're presenting. And so considering is the podium going to be blocking someone's view or things like that, which happens a lot as well.
Thank you so much. Our next question is about the accessibility to lactation rooms and breaks for breastfeeding. Not all places have these spaces available, or some are cumbersome to get access to and only available to employees of a building and not the public. What can be done to improve accessibility to lactation rooms and planning for breaks for pumping and breastfeeding?
Yeah, so this is Claire again. This is going back to my master's thesis. So I did public health in my studies and had written actually about lactation rooms for a co-op grocery store, as you were saying, kind of focused on employees. We don't do much with this in Blue Trunk since we're focused more on the disability aspect, although there's a lot of overlap for sure. And it is a health condition and you're dealing with medical and health and all of that. If you have, you could have, ideally you would have two spaces, right? If there's an extra little conference room or office that you can have two set aside, one that's just a quiet room anyone can use at any time, and one that is a lactation room that you could actually lock the door and have some privacy. Yeah, we haven't done as much with this. I have a lot of non-Blue Trunk thoughts on it through my public health lens. But I'd say having a room that you can lock, having refrigeration, all of those things. And some venues are very welcoming to you using their employee space if you just ask. So I actually was traveling recently with a friend who was pumping, and she needed access to a freezer, and they said, "You're welcome to use our freezer at the hotel. There aren't freezers in the rooms, there's only fridges, but you can use the employee freezer." So if you're at a space that does have a lactation room and you have one or two attendees coming who might need it, it is worth it to ask. As Renee said, they're very willing to do some things and welcoming. Some things are just not possible, but yeah, you don't know unless you ask them.
Thank you. This is Emily. I'm going to ask, this is a scenario we've got, and the next two questions are related to kind of pushback or resistance to accessibility. So we have a scenario where, you mentioned not being able to do major retrofitting. So here's an example. What should we do in a situation like this? If you have an ADA compatible ramp to a main conference space on campus, but it's old and bumpy, wooden spacers have rotted away, so there are many tripping hazards now. There was a plant sale recently, and this person asking the question wanted all the gaps to be flagged and painted in a caution color, but they were afraid that people with mobility issues, tripping, they wanted to make sure that they were accommodating them, but others did not want it flagged. So at that time, they didn't sort of ask why, but it was noted that the visuals and liability were some part of that decision. How does one handle the situation when accessibility is assumed that it's probably, but it's not really in practice?
Yeah, this is Claire. That is another great question. Ideally, right, you would want the ramp replaced. And so I think one of the things is finding those advocates within your organization who can really help. And especially with something like this, where maybe you're taking it to executive or budgets, if it's something you're using a lot and you're trying to justify, we need to purchase a new one, they're not that expensive. Ramps are pretty cheap. And two, if it is a hazard like this, it's probably not compliant anymore. And so trying to point that out. And if you are somewhere that, right, if you're at a large institution, maybe there's one somewhere else, like the conference center had one. So maybe you can try to borrow one from another department or someone else until you're able to get a new one. And then I would say in terms like with this, in addition to just flagging or painting on the ground, you could also have kind of some other signage that's up, right? So if someone's not looking down, they don't see it. Maybe they're using a walker, so their vision's impaired a bit in front of them. Having some other signage that's up, making it clear, like, this is bumpy, please beware, please walk with caution. Ideally, right, getting a new one. And I think this is what people run into a lot, where it's like, well, yeah, it's accessible. We have a ramp. We went to a restaurant when Rupa and I were traveling together, actually, and the ramp was, I think people can see my screen, right? The ramp was probably like this steep. It was not, we weren't in the US. It was not at all compliant. And had it been like a power chair or anything else, that would have been extremely dangerous and a huge lawsuit. She has a transport chair and we were able to do it. But yeah, we did the thing where accessible, and that's not always the case. And I know that's not a solution to fix it, but I think finding those advocates, and again, these like the portable ramps and things they're not that expensive. So without doing major retrofitting, you could still justify having some of those supplies on hand to make things more accessible. And we did have a discussion with a group, I think actually in our workshop after our presentation, we had a discussion about, right, what if you're in a space that the meeting space is in a basement in a church? You might just have to move the meeting space, right? So it might be, okay, this isn't accessible, so we're going to have it outside, or we're going to try to see if there's another room on the main floor. So when possible, that might be an option as well.
Thank you so much. We have a question about COVID and sort of, it's still circulating. There are emergency respiratory illnesses. Are there discussions about accessibility for events for those who are immunocompromised? An example was, do venues share information about their air filtration systems?
Yeah, this is Claire. We have not handled that, like dealt with that head on. I think definitely air filtration systems, that was something that was big at kind of the beginning and the peak of COVID that people shared. Less so now. Definitely having masks, Yeah, I mean, that's a hard one because I think even if you're masked, you might not be comfortable if it's not good air filtration and if other people aren't. Um, yeah, you could try to get information about air filtration systems if you're able to hold an event outside, or if someone can be seated near like a door or window that's open to help. I think there's some other ways, but that's definitely a big concern, and unfortunately not something I have a dearth of insight into.
I think those were great suggestions. And this is Emily again asking a question about folks that maybe don't necessarily identify needing accommodation or might be unsure of what to ask for, uncomfortable to ask for it when they register an event. Do you also suggest marketing the event or program as accessible and listing some of the specific accommodations that will be at that event? And let me just kind of ask this question, a double question. So the next question is, in addition, like what about unseen disabilities? I know you talked about that a little bit in your presentation, accommodating folks with maybe the more invisible disabilities.
Yeah, this is Claire. So definitely, that in terms of the registration, I'll answer that part first. I think we tried to make it clear, and I'm trying to remember exactly what that looked like now, but if you just give a vague box of like other requests, then people put in weird things sometimes that have nothing to do with accommodations. So it is helpful to give some examples of if you have if you have allergies or mobility, or right, you can give like, we will be providing X, Y, and Z. Like all events will be captioned. Um, we will have ingredients available. It'll be nut free. If you have other requests around disability accommodations, please let us know. So it can be helpful to give examples. And then with invisible disabilities, I think some of it, right, some of those things like larger text or the fidget spinners address that a bit, the quiet room. Again, having a sign or at registration, if you have any disability requests or accommodation requests, please let us know. Just that instant. And that was again at the very beginning when people gave examples, greeted with a smile, people were helpful. That can make such a difference. So making it clear, like, please ask us. We're happy to try to make it work for you. And then there was one other thought I had on this. I'm trying to think of multi-part question. What was it? Oh, in terms of invisible disabilities, so we didn't get into this for events. There are several airports now that participate in the Sunflower Lanyard program. And so for people with invisible disabilities, especially for autism, to have the lanyard so that when they go through security or when they're going through the boarding process, the employees at the airport know that they have a disability and might need some accommodations, even though it's not visible. And that's a program you can look up. It's the Sunflower Invisible Disability Program. And then the other thing I think is just to really like make sure to not assume that someone is wrong for using accommodations. Right. Again, so Rupa, my co-founder, she is not very visibly disabled. She can walk some distances, but she still needs a wheelchair. She has upper extremity reduction, so she can't type or do a lot with her hands. So just looking at her, you wouldn't think she needs a lot of accommodations. And she has had situations where she's walking from the car to the grocery store and people yell at her for using the accessible parking spot. So to try to not make assumptions, we don't want people taking the accessible parking spot who don't need it, but a lot of people it's not visible. And so provide those accommodations and don't question how much, if someone needs it or if they're like, don't feel like they're taking advantage of you.
And I just want to kind of add in as we're closing in on our time here, that I think working with Blue Trunk helped me shift my own perspective on accommodations from that event planner mode of, oh, we have 10 accommodations we have to deal with, to, oh, this is an opportunity to help these 10 people have even a more positive experience at our event. And how can we, as Penn State Extension, provide, an outstanding experience for people at our events. What is it going to take to do that? And just being more aware of being welcoming and kind and offering upfront, letting people know that we're there. If they need something, come see us. Just that whole feeling of welcoming. And a lot of you mentioned that in the chat in the beginning. And that's the thing that I think the Blue Trunk education really helped shift my own mindset to making sure we are being welcoming and moving away from ADA. So I really want to thank Claire for presenting today and being my partner today, but they really were fabulous to work with for our event. And I felt our team went away looking at accommodations much differently.
Okay, great. Thank you to Renee and Claire for being here today. We are going to close out our session, but before we go, we would like to, I would like to show or bring attention to some resources that Cheryl has put into the chat. So we have some email addresses over here for Renee and Claire, as well as recording resources that will be at the NAEP SDP website.